So, kinda left you guys on a cliffhanger last time, didn't I? Well, sorry about the unnecessary wait, but as promised, I'm back today to wrap up this little narrative I started crafting in the last video. It's finally time to finish connecting the dots of this series and put the lore to bed once and for all. Or at least pretend to. But anyways, what's up my guys and gals, it's your boy Tyromaniac, back with another smoking hot video, and today, I'm talking back about the lore of Internecion Cube. Again. If you came to a video about the lore of Internecion Cube not expecting spoilers, that's on you. If you're watching the third part of my series about Internecion Cube but don't know what the series is about, that's also on you. Now if you'll excuse me, I have sources to make up. Let's just rip the band-aid off right now. Kirie got captured by Refenok, and I've got two reasons for thinking this. First, look at her house. There's cobwebs everywhere, all the plants are dying, and she still has kid cuisine in her fridge, which all makes it look like no one's lived there in a really long time. Second, look at what she's wearing in the scene where she kills IC-313n. Kirie herself looks a lot older, and her clothes are ripped to shreds, but they look like the exact same clothes, especially with that shoulder-high collar. It wouldn't exactly make sense for her to wear the same torn-up clothes from years ago unless she was being held somewhere where she couldn't get new ones, like as a test subject in a government-sponsored research facility, for example. So, with Kirie spending the last 5 years at Refenok in extreme isolation while being put through constant experimentation, all between the ages of 7 and 12, approximately, I can't even begin to imagine the absolute state she's in emotionally. Best I can say is, there's a reason she shows about as much emotion as a corpse, unless Max or murder are involved, that is. I'd also imagine that's why she hates Icon with such a burning passion, since Icon infecting her dragged her into this circle of hell in the first place. I could also pull in another example from Design, but I think we've had enough of those in this series. If you've seen Design Season 1, just know that Kirie and Callie are probably in the same emotionally stunted boat. Anyways, moving from sociopath to psychopath, another thing I want to say is that I think Icon's time at Refenok is what led her to gaining a sense of humanity. How? Well, listen to what Kirie says in part 3.
Innocence or humanity you see in the Origin Cube is a perverse disguise born of the mountains of corpses it's consumed.
So basically, Icon assimilated the combined humanities of all her past victims, leading her to become sentient by leeching off of them. The only difference is that while Kirie said she did it on purpose to try and manipulate Max, I'd say it happened on its own without Icon realizing, hence the identity crisis Max refers to in literally the next line of dialogue.
Part of me believes she genuinely doesn't know what she is.
This might also explain her god complex, since if you suddenly gained sentience with no prior memories and the ability to manipulate organic and inorganic matter as you see fit, you'd probably think pretty highly of yourself too. Anyways, the main idea of all this is that the complete isolation and constant experimentation led Kirie to lose her sense of humanity, while Icon gained hers by essentially stealing it from her past victims, giving her an identity crisis and a god complex at the same time. This all started back when they were both taken into custody after the first containment breach in 2028, and only ended for Kirie after she escaped during the second in 2033. Meanwhile, Icon would remain in government captivity until 2036, when Kirie and Max managed to steal her from the Riddle Air Force Base, leading to the events of Part 1 as Refenok tries to steal her back, until... Now, it almost looks like the government just gives up chasing Max and Icon after this, since we don't see any more agents later in the series. However, we know that they're still after them since Max tells Icon to keep an eye out for them when they stop at the diner in Part 3. So, the government's still after them, they're just using more covert means. I'd guess that after watching Icon use a helicopter like Play-Doh, the government decided conventional means weren't going to cut it, and that they were going to have to fight fire with fire. That's right, I'm giving the Weeb Duo plot significance. I'm gonna assume that IC-313n, or Iceland if this concept art is to be believed, is pretty standard for a variant as far as her backstory goes. She was an average person until she got infected by the cube, and now she's being held captive as a test subject at Refenok. This means that, with Icon's control over the other variants being cut off by the mechanical body, Iceland was one of the ones to break free and join the dissociated strain, hence the pop-up Icon gets before her big reveal that says, spliced entity detected, divergent strain IC-313n. Now, with Icon successfully contained for the most part, making it pretty hard for her to infect new victims, and Iceland having a designation as high as 313, I'd assume she's a pretty recent infectee, probably an employee at Refenok who was just a little too close to Icon's containment chamber during the breach. That said, I think the interesting part is actually what happens after she gets infected. You see, I'd imagine having 2 containment breaches in 5 years taught Refenok that facing Icon head-on with conventional weaponry wasn't going to cut it anymore. So, out of desperation, they came up with an idea: use the dissociated strain. Basically, the idea would be to weaponize a few dissociated strain variants and train them to get Icon back under control if, or when, she breaches containment again. Sure, this might seem a bit out there, but as it turns out I lied earlier because we're going back to design. The funny thing is that in the design universe, Reef and Ox specialized in weaponizing captured left hands and deploying them against their own kind. So, what we have is an alternate version of Reef and Ox using captured left hands as weapons against their own kind, which is basically exactly what I said they were going to do with Iceland. Speaking of who, what is it we see her doing in Internecion Cube again? Oh yeah, trying to capture Icon. Anyways, I've talked a lot about Iceland so far, but what about Krow? Well, I don't have as much evidence for this one, like I've ever had any, but I'd imagine he was also a Reef and Ox employee during the 2033 breach. The only difference is that he survived more or less unscathed, unlike his sister. Now, if Reef and Ox trying to weaponize the dissociated strain variants, they'd need some way of controlling them so they don't just go rogue and become an even bigger problem. That's where I think this line of dialogue comes in.
The position of the administrator. Like it or not, I can't harm you directly unless your access is revoked.
I mentioned in my first video that Max lied about being Icon's administrator so he could keep her under control, and we know that it worked since Icon clearly wants him dead, and yet there he is, still breathing. However, what if there's some truth behind the lie? What if Max got the idea by copying what Reef and Ox was actually doing with the weaponized variants? What I'm saying is, Reef and Ox was giving these variants administrators that they had to take orders from and weren't allowed to harm, just like what we see Max doing with Icon. This would explain why Icon bought Max's story so easily, and it would make sense to use Iceland's biological brother as her administrator since he'd probably stand the best chance of not having his soul evicted from his body. So, to put everything in order, I think that Krow and Iceland were originally employees at Reef and Ox until Iceland got infected during the 2033 containment breach. This led Reef and Ox to take her into custody and experiment on her as part of a new directive to weaponize certain left-hand variants to help recontain Icon if she ever breached containment again. Krow was recruited as her administrator since, as her brother, he stood the best chance of keeping her under control and not meeting God in the process. Then, in 2036, when Icon got stolen by Max, Reef and Ox would deploy the two of them for a field test to see if they could succeed where the feds failed. Of course, after talking about the Weeb Duo for however long it's been, they aren't the only characters from Part 3 that I want to cover. Look at the receptionist from Kirie's flashback. Her name is Sylvie, and just like that, you know exactly where this is going. Well, it would make sense for the receptionist to get infected in the 2028 breach since he's, you know, right there. Also, IC-313n and Sylvie are the only two characters we've seen so far with this swept over one eye haircut. No one else, at least with hair this long. Anyways, you saw this coming from a mile away, but I think that Sylvie got captured by Reef and Ox after the 2028 breach and was given her IC-313n designation. It would make sense based on the timeline I've established since this shot of the hallway shows us that there are only 40 people infected by this point. So, if we assume that 12 people were on duty at Reef and Ox that day who got infected, a fair bet for a facility that size, then getting a 52 designation would make sense if she was contained shortly thereafter. Hell, I'd even go so far as to say that the creature lurking in the background while Kirie gets infected is IC-313n too. I mean, Kirie did start drawing something that looked pretty similar immediately after that scene where she executed IC-313n. Oh, and look, it has the same haircut too. I mean, why else would Liam Vickers show this to us seconds after IC-313n's death? To tell us that they're the same person. That's probably why Kirie killed her in the first place, now that I think about it. You see, the background during that scene looks very similar to the background from Kirie's flashback, so both scenes are probably taking place at Reef and Ox. That raises the question though, why would Kirie go back to Reef and Ox and risk getting recaptured just to kill IC-313n? Simple, she wouldn't. I mentioned earlier that Kirie's wearing the same clothes in this scene that she was when she got infected as a kid. If this scene was taking place after Kirie escaped, then she wouldn't be wearing the same ripped apart, definitely too small clothes she had been wearing for the past 5 years, meaning this scene happens before or during her escape. Anyways, another thing we know is that IC-313n was confused about why Kirie was attacking her, which makes sense based on the timeline of events I've established. The dissociated strain didn't exist in 2028 when IC-313n and Kirie got infected, so anyone infected was still under Icon's direct control. I'd imagine this would mean that IC-313n would be missing a good chunk of her memories when she finally did break away into the dissociated strain, maybe like how Kirie has those memory corruptions in her flashback. This means that IC-313n was just some poor girl who was being puppeted by Icon, and now she's caught in the crosshairs of Kirie's revenge quest because of something she doesn't even remember. So, wrapping everything up, I think that IC-313n was originally a receptionist at Reef and Ox named Sylvie who got infected during the 2028 containment breach and, just like Kirie, got taken into custody once the situation was under control. Flash forward to 2033 and IC-313n, now free from Icon's control as part of the dissociated strain, has no memory of what happened while she was being puppeted. Unfortunately for her life expectancy, Kirie very much remembers and made her the first target in her revenge quest. When Icon breaches containment again in 2033, Kirie uses the chaos to make her getaway, but make sure to pay her old friend Sylvie a visit. All the while, Sylvie has no memory of what's happened, or why she's suddenly being attacked. Anyways, now that I've rambled my way through all the individual theories, let's finally take a step back and put them all together. So, here's what I think the full story of Internecion Cube is. In the year 2028, a young Kirie Bonin and her father Hans Bonin took a trip to Reefenach Biowaste Management on Thanksgiving because Hans's team needed him for their project. That project was meant to turn a mechanical superweapon into a containment device for a dormant icon. The goal was to both restrain her power and sever her connection to the variant she created. Unfortunately, Icon woke up during the procedure and breached containment, leading to the infection of Kirie, Sylvie the receptionist, and anyone else within range. Reefenach would eventually be able to bring the situation back under control once the mechanical body came online and started doing its job, allowing them to recontain Icon and anyone else who was infected, again including Kirie and Sylvie. Over the next 5 years, Kirie's time of confinement led her mental health into a downward spiral while also fostering her hatred for the cube. Icon, meanwhile, would spend those 5 years assimilating the combined humanities of her previous victims, leading her to develop her own sense of humanity with an identity crisis and god complex tacked on for free. Meanwhile, with the mechanical body loosening her control over the other variants more and more, they're eventually able to break free and become the dissociated strain. Unfortunately, Icon also spent those 5 years assimilating the mechanical body's programming, eventually figuring out how to disable her restrictions and regain access to her full power. The minute she did, she breached containment yet again in 2033, leading to more infections and more collateral damage as Reefenach scrambled to get everything back under control, allowing Kirie to escape in the process, while also taking a quick pit stop to visit a very confused IC-313n. Reefenach would eventually recontain Icon and any of the new infections, just not before the facility got completely trashed, forcing them to demolish the Eisenhower Tunnel, destroying any lingering evidence of the experiments that took place there, and move their operations over to the Riddle Air Force Base. To prevent any future incidents like this, Reefenach would also begin trying to weaponize the variants so that they could be used against Icon when conventional means fail, with IC-313n, who was infected and captured during the 2033 breach, and her brother Krow being chosen for the project. However, Reefenach wouldn't get the chance to give the program a test run until 3 years later in 2036. That's because Kirie recruited Max, an old classmate of hers, to help her steal Icon from the government captivity and complete her revenge quest. Not that he knows about that last part. With no other options, Reefenach set the Weeb Duo loose as a sort of field test to retrieve Icon for them, which for some reason involved bombing a diner. Anyways, good lord was that a lot more effort than I thought it'd be. Sorry again for making this into 2 parts, but I have a chronic, deep-seated fear of making long videos, so yeah. I do have to say though, while most of what I said in this video came from my own smooth, rotted brain, I do have to thank a few commenters from the first video for helping me out. Thank you to Fotis Manilopoulos, hope I got that right, for suggesting that the mechanical body was a containment device rather than just being a government superweapon, to Anton Birkbigler for suggesting the idea that Icon was originally being kept dormant and that pieces of her were being broken off, to NB for bringing up the idea that safe mode was similar for Icon and laptops, and to Diego Xavier for leading me to the idea that Icon leashed her humanity off her past victims. Anyways, I gotta admit, I don't have nearly as much confidence in this one as I did in my first video, but I still tried my best to find evidence for everything. It was honestly less about adding more theories to the pile, and more about trying to piece together a narrative that connected all my previous theories and made sense for the Internecion Cube universe, and Liam Vickers' kinda kooky writing style. Unfortunately, that means this is officially the last video I'm gonna make about the lore of this series. It's been fun, but there are only so many theories I can throw out there before I run out of ideas, you know? But anyways, that's it for this video, so remember to light up that like button, smoke that subscribe button, drop a big old comment, check out some of the videos on the left, and I will see you guys in the next video.